Hello and welcome to this video in which we're going to be looking at a specific situation where white has advanced their pawn to the 7th rank in a rook ending, but the pawn is blocked by their own king. One of the techniques that we're going to see in order to advance that pawn is something called building a bridge. So let's jump right to the positions. So here we see that white has an extra pawn. It's advanced to the 7th row. However, it's blocked by a king. And if we were to try just leaving with our king with the idea that next we'll promote, the problem we're going to run into is that black will hit us with more and more checks. And so they'll essentially keep on checking us for forever, and we wouldn't really have anywhere to hide. One problem that we would run into if we were to, for example, try to approach this rook this way using a zigzag, black will just attack our pawn, and now we'd have to defend it, and so we'd end up coming back, and then they give us a check again. So this doesn't quite work. What we want to do from that first position is we're going to actually start by giving a check with our rook. And what this does is it forces the black king to a square that's not good. And they have a couple options. One option is they move their king to f6. If they do that, it's actually quite easy. We move our king over, and next move we're going to get a queen. So probably what they do is they would move their king to the h file. And now we have a couple ways to win, but I think the simplest way is actually just to move our rook to e1 here. From here, it defends the pawn. Now, we're threatening to move our king to d7. We're also threatening to move our king to f7. Black cannot stop both of those threats at the same time. So let's see, for example, if they were to move their rook to d2, stopping one of those ideas. Now we move our king to f7, and they can try to give us checks the way they did in the other line. But the problem is that our rook is always going to be defending this pawn. For starters, the rook is also guarding the checks in that they can't play rook e2. But even if somehow this were not the case, because our rook is backing up the pawn, we can essentially just wander with our king anywhere. Doesn't really matter because next move we're going to get a queen. If we contrast that with the original position, recall that black was able to attack our pawn and we had to go back. So this doesn't work for black. It works very well for us. There's other ways to win this position, but I think this is simplest. Play rook e1, you're threatening king d7, you're threatening king f7. There's no way for black to stop both. They could try king g7 also, and then in this case we'd go this way. And again, same issue that we have. They can give us some checks, but they have no way to actually stop the pawn. So eventually these checks will run out, and then we'll get a queen. So okay, so that's one approach. Let's say that black plays a little bit better defense in the initial position, and they actually have their rook already lined up on this row. So right now they have a setup that is pretty effective because their rook is blocking us from escaping on the d file, their king is blocking us from escaping on the g file. This is where we're going to use a technique called building a bridge. This position is called the Lucena position. And so we start by giving a check, same way as we did in the other line. Black has a couple options. We'll look at them one by one. If they move to king f6, same problem as happened in the other line. We move our king to f8, and then we get a queen. So they're going to move to the h file. They can start with king to h7. And now we make what would be kind of a mysterious move. Now, I'm going to show what happens if we don't make the correct move first, just to understand why we're doing that. If we try to just escape first with king f7, we're going to run into a problem that they're going to just be putting us in check again and again and force us back to the first place. So they give us a check, we come here, they give us another check, we have to keep guarding the pawn, they give us another check. If we try to escape this way, then they're going to go here, attack our pawn, and we have to come back to here. So actually the only way that we can ever get out of these checks is by putting our king back here, but this just reaches the initial position. So we didn't progress. We didn't actually ruin anything yet because we would have only repeated this position for the second time. It's only when it happens a third time that we have a draw. However, we didn't make progress. So the key move here is the somewhat mysterious, if you haven't seen the move before, rook g4. And the idea is that we are going to eventually interpose our rook on e4, and that's going to be a way to stop the checks. So black does not really have anything useful to do here. So they might move their rook to d1 so that they continue to cover the d file. Now we can actually escape with our king. King f7, rook f1 check, king e6, give a check, go here. We have to protect our pawn. Now, if they decide to give us a check again, we will move our king up to e5. They'll give us a check, and now this is where the key of having moved our rook to g4 comes in. We can move our rook between to block the check. This is what building a bridge is. We have made a bridge so that our pawn can cross. Now they trade, and then we get a queen. So just to go over the sequence again to see it once more, what happens is as our king comes out, check, 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 and then we're interposing, and we are now succeeding. Going back a couple moves, there's a couple other options for black. If we looked at this position, we might think, wait, why did they give a check? There was no need to give a check, because at this point, are we really threatening to get a queen? Actually, in fact, we are. The issue is if they were to move their rook here, it looks like maybe it's a better move because it's stopping us from immediately building a bridge. But one thing we could do is make a queen anyway. Looks crazy because we're giving away our pawn. Then they take it. Now we go here and we have a double attack. We're threatening checkmate by moving our rook to h4. We're also threatening the rook, so this would be winning. Going back a couple moves, we might also say, wait, maybe then that means that black should move their king to h6 instead. So that way, in that one specific line, we're not threatening a checkmate when we move our king to f7. However, this also doesn't work for a slightly different reason. Move our rook to g4. So good thing is it's the exact same moves that you have to make. So you don't need to remember in one specific situation, you move your rook to g4, another situation, you do something else. It's always rook g4. Rook comes down. Nothing for black to do. Now we start to come out. They give us a check. We're threatening to promote, so give us a check again. We come over here, and now the situation's a little bit different than it had been before because we're not really threatening to get a queen because we no longer have this idea that we will attack the rook from f7 after we made a queen and also threaten checkmate. But the thing is, we're threatening checkmate right now. And so black has to deal with that. One way they could deal with that is to move their king to h5. Now we have a common maneuver in rook endings that we can give a check. And this check is a problem because white gains a tempo after the king moves. Now we put our rook in between anyway. And so we've still successfully built a bridge, just on a bit different place. So this is what building a bridge is. It's a technique that you can use when you have your pawn on the 7th row and your king is blocking the pawn. In a future video, we'll look at how black can try to defend in this sort of situation. One hint, though, that I'll say about the defense, if you're looking at this kind of position and you're looking at it several moves ahead of time, trying to figure out, is this a position that's winning, or is it a position I want to go for, or is it not? The only technique that black can ever use to draw this kind of ending is to do checks from the side. So they never will be able to do checks this way because building a bridge will always be effective in stopping it. Sometimes checks from the side would be effective, like in this sort of position. They are able to check us all the time from the side. This is not always going to work. There's going to be some rules on when it works and when it doesn't. However, this approach sometimes works, whereas the approach from the back will never work once the attacking side's king has already gotten in front of the pawn, as it has here. Okay, so that's all for now. Thank you for watching this video. See you next time.